Thanks everybody for coming, and for anybody else who will be viewing this offline on YouTube. I'm Khalil. I run all of Zuva's content, and today we have an amazing set of guests joining us. We're going to be turning our focus to a bunch of industry experts who each have built highly successful AI training programs. Combined, these speakers' respective programs have built thousands of AI models. Let me repeat that: thousands of AI models. So you're gonna learn a bunch today about how each of them have approached their AI training goals, the challenges they faced, and how they developed the discipline within their organizations. If you're in product, or you're a knowledge management leader, and you're responsible for helping your end users maximize contract intelligence, this webinar is going to be super duper helpful for you. And without further ado, I'm gonna kick it off now to Noah to take over the hosting duties.
Hello. So welcome current and future viewers, and welcome panel. We did a first version of this webinar, sort of running a successful AI contracts, AI training practice back in the spring with me and Risa Jacob, who's the manager of our legal knowledge engineering team. Legal knowledge engineering is the team at Zuva, and previously Kira, who teach the software to find new models. And as some of you may know, Zuva comes with more than 1,300 pre-built models out of the box, and Kira too. Despite that, lots of people our customers end up building new models. So this particular webinar is going to be more focused on people at professional service firms. We've got some law firms and an ALSP represented, alternative legal services provider represented here, who've decided to enhance Kira or Zuva or some other AI tool themselves. And we thought it'd be really helpful to sort of broaden the perspective. And in a forthcoming one of these, we're going to get some people on from some other AI vendors. So just to give one other perspective. So for people who are building an AI training practice, I think this series, the last one, this one, and the next one will be really helpful ways to get hands-on with a bunch of people who have actually got a ton of experience with this. So all that said, let us move on to introducing the panelists. First off, Shea, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Shea Smock. I'm an analyst on a small innovations team at Chapman and Cutler. We're headquartered in Chicago with about 250 to 300 attorneys that are focused on finance. So we're really a transactional firm, and we don't do a lot of due diligence or large M&A projects. Despite that, we still have about 785 custom clauses in Kira right now, going into more than 70 active projects. I started in 2016 while I was a law student at Maurer School of Law in Indiana, and I've been at Chapman ever since. Prior to law school, I taught diffusion of innovations in media literacy at Butler and Florida State universities. So happy to be here.
We are happy to have you here. So just to be clear, Chapman has built 785 custom models in addition to all the ones that Kira already had out of the box.
Yes, exactly. And then a few hundred in our other unsupervised program. And then we're constantly, demoing new tools, but Kira tends to be our favorite. We've stuck with it since before it was called Kira.
Yeah, yes, very true. That's awesome. Sapheen, please tell me if I'm mispronouncing your name as well.
Sapheen is great. You can also call me Saf. I'm happy with either. It's nice to join. I'm really pleased to be taking part in this. So I am a member of what we are calling our law tech practice at Macfarlanes. Macfarlanes being a London-based city law firm. Similarly, our focus tends to be less on the low value, high volume due diligence type work. And respectively, because our focus, the focus of our particular practice tends to be on client-facing tools in particular that are designed to combine some element of the legal advice and legal practice that we do for clients with technology. AI and machine learning plays a huge role in this. For the specifics of the work that we tend to do, actually the majority of the models we use are trained by us. Just because there's quite a lot of nuances in the type of practice that we typically do. So it was really important for us to establish, obviously, an excellent technologist practice, but also to make sure that we had the capability to start with and the right tools from the very beginning. Like Shea, I also started in 2016, and at the time, the sort of early version of our team, I was the second person in it in total. We're now a practice of about 20. Which is great in terms of growth. We are a very well-balanced mix of technologists and lawyers, and that includes subject matter experts that we work with really closely across all of our transactional and advisory practices. My personal background is more on the technology side. So prior to joining Macfarlanes, I actually worked on a number of machine learning and other tech-related projects in the field of medicine. So law was an interesting change for me as a subject, but it's been a lot of fun to see this particular industry evolve over what is quite a short space of time. So it's been really interesting.
Neat. Devon, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Devon McGuire. I am a solutions consultant with Mainspring Consulting Group, and our focus is really around providing professional services around contract lifecycle management and CPQ as well. My role, I work with all different parts of the business, from procurement to legal to sales, that are involved in the contracting process, to really talk about their goals and how they can be met with contract data, most often regarding their CLM activity. I was one of the first members of Mainspring's data and analytics practice, which again kind of fits the timeline with Shea and Saf, that it was back in 2015, I think, when this was all really coming to fruition, and we started using Seal software and then switched over to Kira. But really, I was involved in building out our standard processes for contract data extraction. And I myself spent 5 years as a data extraction analyst, where I personally trained over 60 quick study models. And that was really based on a lot of unique business requirements, across HLS, fintech, high-tech companies. Mainspring, we don't really specialize in any vertical. So we've managed to be able to kind of work with our customers' SMEs to gather the requirements so that our team can build those models kind of based on what they're able to share with us. So that's one thing I think that's really been exciting for us as we've grown, is really be able to see how we're able to build really custom models, working with our customers to understand their requirements.
Thank you. One thing that I think would be really interesting for me, at least, is to drill a little bit further. Like, you all have done quite a lot of building out custom models, and I think it'd be really interesting to hear more about why and when you do that, right? Like, Kira comes with a whole lot of stuff out of the box. Zuva comes with a whole lot of stuff out of the box. Other systems come with more or less types of models out of the box. How often do you end up using the out-of-the-box stuff versus training your own? What sort of influences that choice, and where are the areas where you have built up a lot of your own? Just to change the direction a little, Devon, would you like to start?
Sure. Kind of as I mentioned, we really work with different areas of the business. So a lot of times we're working with customers that are looking for data very specific to their business to bring over into another application. So that's kind of when custom models come into play for us. For example, we worked with a procurement of a pharmaceutical company that was really looking for a better way to understand their supply chain and wanted to track what supply agreements were associated to what products. And so we actually trained a model that went through their supply agreements and extracted all of the active pharmaceutical ingredients that were contracted for. So when it comes to custom models for us, it's usually really working to understand what the goal of the customer is in tracking their data, and trying to understand what contract language will bring that out in a way that they can track ongoing.
And do you use out-of-the-box models as well, or is it all custom, or
Yeah, I would say we use out-of-the-box models supplemented with custom, right? So in a lot of our use cases is around legacy migration. So they're really interested in knowing the basics of, when does this contract expire? Who is it with? The basic things, what is our limitation of liability financial cap? So we are using those out-of-the-box fields on every project. It's just, when we come into these specific areas where they have a real need or have identified that there's value in their contracts they're not getting, that's specific to their business. That's when we look to build the custom models.
How about you, Saf?
Sorry, I need to be quicker taking myself off mute. I actually really resonate with what Devon said. I think this has a lot to do with the goal that our client is trying to achieve. But obviously in our context as well, there's a lot of specificity around the kinds of documents that we typically look at. Taking a recent example, a big chunk of work that we have done has been around trading document analysis. So things like ISDAs, prime brokerages, etc. And some of the nuances of those particular kinds of document can vary quite considerably. So, for example, if you are working where the different counterparties use different versions or have slightly different nuances in those documents, we typically train our models to account for those nuances as much as we can. And particularly in trading documents in general, that is quite significant in terms of variation, as with like a lot of financial instruments. So it really does, I think, focus in particular on document types, but also specifically what we're looking for. And we do use quite a lot of out of the box models as well. It will typically depend on the exercise, particularly as with Devon said, where we can sort of supplement our work with them. But I would say, yeah, it very much depends on document type as well as what our clients are looking for.
So you do end up using some amount of the out of the box stuff, but then supplementing it, kind of like Devon?
Sort of, yeah. It depends on the kind of exercise that we're doing and the sort of wide-ranging nature of it. What we will tend to do when we use the out-of-the-box tools is that we will, the out-of-the-box algorithms is that we'll typically refine some of the results we get with other pieces of technology. So, for example, if within that we are searching for keywords and phrases that can answer specific questions that we might be asking, we'll apply like another sort of logic layer on top of those as well. So it's a nice way to combine and refine a lot of the results that we get.
Neat. How about you, Shea?
I would say the majority of our extractions are out of the box. Most of the ones that I built were at the very beginning when Kira didn't have as many out of the box options and you couldn't build on top of those existing clauses. Now we can, and it goes a lot faster. However, I try to focus on perfect extraction because it is, when you're talking to usually our internal client, the attorney, it can be quite difficult to explain machine learning, what this does, the difference between an out-of-the-box model and a custom model that I'm going to build. I try to say, we want to start out with less than 200 documents and fewer than 10 clauses ideally, and fewer than 5 that are custom, to see if a project is going to be useful to the attorney, because that's usually the whole goal, is just getting the extractions that are required into an export that makes sense to the attorney, so we can more quickly and confidently answer client questions that perhaps we really couldn't do without machine learning. But we cover like a pretty vast array of topic areas. I went through our list, and the first project I did that was successful was pulling holdings out of Westlaw cases to create a data grid for our public finance group to cite. And it was something that my boss didn't think would work. And I thought, oh, these are exactly the same over and over again. The holding is always in the same spot, and it worked immediately. And so that was our first AI win. It only took a few hours for me to scrape all the holdings out of 200 documents and upload them to our intranet. That was a really cool example. Since then, we've done things like offering memos, railcar leases, commitment letters, MFN elections, landlord waivers, credit agreements, indentures, resolutions, prospectuses, outside counsel guidelines, and then NDAs also. We have like kind of an internal ALSP that does work for some of our large banking institution clients. And we built quite a few custom models there to guide the reviewer while they're in Microsoft Word to that area of the document with the instructions from that specific client on how to edit it.
Neat. So one of the things that keeps coming up in your work, and I think it's kind of natural in that you work at professional service firms, is that you were doing this work, Shea, but then probably on these projects, there's an end client who you may be doing it for, and there's maybe even also an attorney involved, right? Like some other professional in the firm, right? So do you find, how does that play out at your firm? Like, do you ever have the sort of end user attorneys building out the models, or do you guys go with more of a center of excellence model where Shea is the center of excellence? And do you ever have like the end clients building out models? How does that kind of play out? Saf, you feel like starting?
I'd say it tends to be our primary focus. And this is mostly to do with the nature of how our team is organized. We tend to work more directly with clients. And that tends to, so we tend to let them set the, set the sort of prospectus and the terms of the particular engagement that we have. It's also quite helpful in a way because although subject matter experts tend to form a significant amount of the work involved, particularly when it comes to understanding quite complex client types, we have a really strong idea and quite a strong sort of focus at the outset of exactly what the format of that exercise will look like when it gets presented to the client. And I think that's very helpful when you're dealing with, digital services, or when you're dealing with AI in particular. There is not just in terms of, I think we tend to think of AI, and we have for quite some time, as that, we'll take a bunch of documents and throw them into a third-party piece of software, and out will come the results of that particular exercise that we can then, use to create something like a due diligence report. In many ways, because of what we've been asked to do and sort of client need, we've looked really carefully about how we can package some of the data that we get from that into customizable dashboards, things that will provide live information as opposed to like point of time exercises and that kind of thing. So it's a pretty direct focus with us, and it's actually extremely helpful because it then feeds really nicely into the other kinds of exercises that we tend to do. So yeah, I think hopefully that answers your question, but yeah, do let me know.
Yeah. How about you, Shea?
Yeah, I generally am in charge of all of the training and setting up the project, mapping to the out-of-the-box models. That can be kind of complicated once you sit down and talk to the attorney and you know what they really are looking for, then going into the software and picking out, document type and the clauses that will be best. I like to set it up in advance for people, create the extractions, kind of print them, go through, and then I found what I really need to do is then summarize all of the findings in an email in like the most easy to understand way. And that's been the kind of process that has led to the most success of people not just getting like an Excel or a Word spreadsheet at the end and me being like, look what we did, here's all your answers. And then them saying, what is this? So finding a way to like make it clear that this is what you were looking for. These are the extractions. You can do everything in this Excel spreadsheet that you can do within Kira. But we do have a few that are more tech savvy who have logged in themselves, that like going through, that'll edit my tags, particularly internal projects like outside counsel guidelines. Our GC will go in and look and verify things and make his own little notes to himself. So I'd say we've had a few projects where people will log in themselves, but mostly we try to just make sure everything is correct before we let anybody into that kind of closed system.
So interesting. So you're saying like you don't even necessarily, not only do you build the models, you also do a lot of the reviews within Kira.
I do all the reviews, yeah.
And then apart from someone like the GC who might occasionally go in.
Yeah, he is kind of my second set of eyes. Am I on the right? We don't want to bother the attorneys, like happy when we get the project. Usually yeah. A lot of information. So I try to do everything I can and then bring them in and say, am I right? What do I need to fix?
Neat. Cool. So Devon, how about you?
I think kind of the way we work is very similar to Saf, that, we work directly with the clients, but we do the model building, right? So we work with them to really understand what their goals of the data extraction is. But then we go in and build it. So we kind of work collaboratively with them, sharing examples of things we found that we think fits the requirements of what they want extracted, and kind of do that as a check back and forth. They might provide us some samples from some different templates, and then we'll go back, and especially when we have legacy documents, say, hey, we found these pieces of language that we think fits what you're looking for. Can you confirm that with us? One of the pieces that's part of our process is ultimately when we're training these models, the data is going somewhere else, right? So a lot of times it's the target system is a CLM. So there's also people on our team that work with the person training the models to make sure that what they're training to extract can be transformed in a way that it can be loaded in what the end goal is to have this data visualized by the customer. So that's another kind of piece of the puzzle of somebody who's working with the trainer to make sure that the results of what we're getting from the data will be able to be formatted appropriately and really get the customer what they're looking for.
So what type of formats do you find are going into the CLMs? Like, is this?
So if there's let's say there's a pick list value, right, or a multi-pick list value, how are they going to be able to take the text that we train to extract from the contract and then programmatically transform it to match a pick list value and to be mapped that way? So those are the kinds of things that we have to keep in mind when we're training, is to make sure that we'll be able to take that next step of transformation and map it to the values that are going to be available in the CLM.
Sap, it sounds like you guys also do a decent amount of transformation. Is that accurate?
Absolutely, yeah. The formats are, it could be typically governed by client request, but we rely also quite heavily on our use of integrations and APIs. For that very reason, we want to package the outputs from the tools that we use or from the AI training that we've done in particular ways. So looking more closely at how we can extract sort of further specificity, as I was talking about earlier, from either from like certain clauses or certain definitions that we're looking for, but also thinking really carefully about how the client will use that. So if we're talking about, an institutional asset manager, say like a fund, for example, you might have different views or different requirements from their legal team or from the general counsel in terms of the level of information and the level of detail they want from those documents, versus their more sort of operational treasury teams who just want to be able to see the data that sits within those documents and be able to make quick decisions based on it. So our formats and our outputs vary quite considerably for that reason. And we think really carefully about that from the outset because it governs all of our training from the very beginning.
And so then you basically might take the outputs from Kira, whatever system you're using, and then refine it further with some additional tools put on top of those results? Exactly,
yeah. And the benefit of particularly Kira, which is the one that we use at the moment, is the level of customizable integrations, because it just enhances what we're able to do and what we're able to deliver.
You mean through the API?
Yeah.
How about you guys, Shea? Do you tend to just take the results as they are, or are you guys doing a further set of transformation on top of it?
We definitely do have to go through again, but I do all of that in Kira. And that's probably why we have so many custom models, because I want it to matter when I'm saying, no, we need the entire paragraph, even though often Kira is correct and that it's picking up the clause language that's relevant. And what we want in our extraction is perhaps the title of that area, the entire paragraph also, which could be a clause, a subclause, and two exceptions in reality, but that's what the attorney is asking for as their extraction. Fortunately, Kira is flexible enough that we can do that. It just requires quite a bit of extra oversight to make sure each of those extractions are perfect. So I perfect them all in Kira, verify the export, and then make if there are any little OCR issues, I would fix those in the Excel export before giving it on to the attorney.
How much are the projects that you're working on kind of like one-off, like we are going to build a specific model for this specific project, versus like it'd be really useful to have coverage of rail car leases? and someone has the idea that it'd be really useful to have railcar releases, and then you go out and try to like do multiple railcar projects. Like, do you end up reusing these custom models that you build on multiple projects, or are these like very custom for one project? Shea, you feel like?
The majority are one-offs. Unfortunately, I'm usually training with the anticipation of this could be an ongoing project, because if it goes well and we continue to get this work, it will be ongoing. And when it is, we continue to use those models. And I've almost never had to go back and retrain, because they're a very like kind of similar documents over and over again, and very little changes between the clause language. But we also have a lot of them that end up being one-offs, because it's just normally we don't need machine learning, but this project's extra big, and we need to pull this from all of them. And sometimes those only take me a few hours for those one-off projects.
How about you, Seth?
Sorry, I'm still not very not much alacrity with the mute button.
Yeah, not getting my.
I actually, I empathize, I think, quite a lot with what Shea has just said. We follow a really similar process to that. Typically for some of the sort of larger challenges that we have, it's really important that we do, because, there is in any sort of given context, an amount of work on top of whatever comes out of Kira that we need to then sort of do, whether that is any sort of manual refinements that we do, any additional work from our subject matter experts to look sort of our extractions and to make sure that they're kosher. So yeah, I think I do think there's quite a lot of crossover. I think as is understandable, because we're both from a legal practice context. I think I empathize quite a lot with everything that you just said, Shea.
How about you, Devon?
Same with Mainspring. I mean, most often they are models that are specifically for a particular customer. I think there are some challenges in, taking a model you've built for one customer and kind of training it to also take on, a similar kind of functionality for another customer's contracts, just given the limited sample set we get at times, and being able to find a kind of a similar number, right? With machine learning, you don't want to give it so many samples of one type of language and then so few of another that it thinks it's your error, right? So I think there are some challenges around taking those models and expanding them for other customers. We definitely have had some successes in doing that, but they've been more broad, right? Things that are super focused, like the model I mentioned before. And we also had something we did recently for a sales team that was trying to look at how they contracted with their partners, the distribution models. I mean, just because it's so specific, it's hard to kind of translate that to another customer.
How does the economic, to the extent you sort of are on the side of this, how does the economic model around training models work for you? Are people paying you guys to develop a model? Are they paying on like time and materials basis? You ever have anyone who takes a model and uses it in their old world? Are people, paying like a flat fee for a model? Is it just included with services? How does this work? Devon, would you like to start?
So we have some different models kind of depending, right? We work with a lot of different technologies. I would say for the most part, and our biggest use case is legacy migration. It's built into part of our services cost when we do the initial scoping of the overall project. But we are starting to partner with some technologies. For example, we built a Zuva adapter for Coupa that we're going to be launching by the end of the year. And with that, obviously, we're going to kind of have if you want a custom model, it's going to be X price. So we have kind of different pricing structures depending on, is it tied to a product like the adapter, or is it more a consulting engagement like a legacy contracts migration?
Nice. Shea, make it really easy for Saf to make sure he gets.
It does kind of depend. For internal projects, we just kind of like to make our attorneys aware there is a cost associated with this. And I generally try to keep projects under 200 documents that are going to be perfect extractions and done quickly. If it's over 1,000 documents, we do a much larger analysis of, how many clauses are going to be needed, how much time this is going to take. And then if it's for a client, really the best way we found is just kind of me guessing how many hours I'm going to be working in there, and also then passing on the costs that we're going to be using within Kira to the client. But it's difficult, I would say, to decide what the pricing should be. And I think we underprice a lot to get the work.
How about you, Seth?
So it varies a lot, I would say. There are some exercises and some pieces of work that we do for clients that is quite easy to package as a single fixed cost. I'm thinking in particular of something like the LIBOR replacement, or the sort of replacement regime that we used, AI very heavily for, in terms of the changeover from the London into bank offered rate. Given the scale of the documents and given that we have, at least some idea of the number of bespoke models we needed to create, it's quite easy for us to take a step back at the outset and actually come up with a fixed pricing structure in that context, particularly if we're looking at one particular client. But it can really vary. A lot of the work that we do tends to be billed at a time spent basis when it comes to AI training. And generally speaking, that will depend on the number of bespoke models needed. We do also, as Shea was saying earlier, we're also very heavily involved in the review part of that work as well. So we typically bill for that as well. So it's usually us using Kira to conduct the review process as well, in combination with subject matter experts. It's a bit of a cop out to say that it can be different in different contexts, but it can really vary. The benefit of AI training, I would say, is that if you're looking at this from like a law firm context, the fact that there is already quite a specific structure around billing for sort of time spent means that putting hours down on the clock for an AI training program is actually much easier than it is for some of our other technology builds, because some of our other sort of more longer project-based work, we have to sort of gauge all of our hours at the outset. Whereas, given how many times that we've used machine learning and AI in particular, it's relatively easy for us to take a step back and make judgments about how long each model is going to take to train. So we're in a beneficial position there, I think, compared to other kinds of work.
Neat. Do you have a sense of how long it takes to train a model, or is it very... my experience has been that it really depends on a few factors. To me, the things that stand out are sort of like how granular you need the model to be. If it's an entity model or something like that, it takes more training data. How rich the documents are with that model. If you're looking for something like exclusivity, it can take quite a while because just finding an exclusivity clause at all is quite tricky. And number three, how varied the examples are. Right? Do all the ones tend to be phrased the same, or are they phrased quite differently? To me, those make huge, in my experience, those make huge differences in terms of how many documents you needed to train. Do you guys have any better sense than, it's been a while since I trained many models, apart from for demo purposes. And I think you certainly have more experience than me at this. Do you have any ideas, Seth?
I won't say it can vary again, because that will be definitely a cop-out, but we do have a very good sense when it comes to a couple of those variables that you just mentioned. So for example, it's easy for us to judge based on analogy from what we've done earlier in either sort of analogous pieces of work or similar bits of work we've done in similar document types, to say, okay, we know that for this particular thing, we're looking for a number, percentage margin in a definition, rather than just extracting the definition itself. We know it's going to take X amount of time to do that kind of work. And we would know how to make that distinction based on a 30-page document versus, God forbid, an 800-page bond indenture or something like that. So it's helpful, I think, at this stage. It certainly was more difficult earlier in this process to gauge timing on things like AI model training, but it has become so much easier given how many analogies we can draw to work that we've done previously. It's been really helpful.
How about you, Shea?
Yes, it does depend. If we're going to do a custom clause and it's like 2 to 3 sentences, same spot in the document every time. And these documents are very similar. I would say this is going to be quick and easy. I'll have this done today, probably, as far as trained enough to press the button and know that it's going to, with some regularity, around the 80%, it'll be picking it up again. The problem is a lot of times we end up with projects where an attorney comes and there's this clause that's very important and very rare, and they have 2 examples of it, and they want to know if these 2 examples appear anywhere else because they haven't found it themselves. That is what can be a lot more challenging. So we've had to get pretty good at creating our own kind of fake data to use to train and to create these overfitted models that are exactly right only for, this type of document on either our paper or third-party paper. It's very formulaic over and over. Those are easy. And then, of course, if you want like 1 sentence or a smaller little thing you're looking to extract, that's going to take, I would say, double or triple the amount of training data. So a really easy one, 30 to 50, a more difficult clause, I would say 100 to 200 examples before we'll be, solid above 88% recall and precision.
What about you, Devon?
Yeah, I would agree with both Saf and Shea, right? Because I think we've all had experience training from the super easy, this is the same clause in the same spot in 10 documents, and they're the first 10 documents I looked at, right? That's super fast. Versus, again, one of our bigger challenges is that legacy migration use case, because we might get 50,000 contracts, right? And the people that we're working with within the customer may have only been at that company 3 years, and these documents are 8, 10 years old, right? So they don't have the insight into the templates or the contracting habits of that time to really be able to point our team in the direction of here's what we're looking for. It's more of, hey, this is the question we're looking to answer. Can you help us figure out where in our old contracts we can find this? So for us, kind of that discovery piece, when the customer can't really tell us an exact clause, give us that exact language, takes a lot more time to kind of go through that process and almost educate our customer who we're looking to as a subject matter expert, saying, hey, by the way, look, 5 years ago, your template looked like this, and the clause you're looking for is called X, which is versus today, where it's in a completely different location or might be stated in a really different way, right? Lawyers can be really creative with how they state the same thing. So I think that that's a challenge in figuring out how much time something's going to take is do we have a real sample set being provided, or is the customer looking for us to help determine what that sample set is?
Makes sense. So switching gears a little bit, it'd be interesting to talk about who does the training on your teams. Like if you have any teammates who do this, and what you think good attributes for trainers or training teams are. So let's start out with, are you the only person who does this? Do you have teammates who do this at all? And if you have teammates, what kind of attributes do you think makes for someone who is good at this? If you don't have teammates, you could also tell me, what makes someone good at training models. Devon, would you like to start?
Sure. So we have a team here. There's about 6 other people that do model training at Mainspring. And really, as same with kind of Saf and Shea, we also do the review piece of the data as well, right? We want to make sure it gets up to the accuracy standards that, our clients are looking for. So a lot of our model trainers have come from that role, right? So they did contract review of data extractions for a few years at Mainspring. And we're exposed to the customer requirements. So I think having, experience with contract language, but specifically in our use cases too, is kind of having that critical thinking business analyst mentality of, okay, not only what can I define in the contract that's what the customer is looking for, but ultimately what's their end state, right? Where are they going to be visualizing this data? How are they really going to ultimately get value? So I think those kind of critical thinking and reading comprehension skills are kind of key in being able to train a good model and understanding what your customer is looking for, right? Being able to translate their requirements into kind of a trainable, parsable piece of information.
Nice. How about you, Saf?
So I don't do a ton of the AI training myself anymore. I certainly used to do quite a bit. but my work tends to be sort of more supervisory or sort of more project management these days. Obviously, we have quite a large team at this point, and to a greater or lesser extent, we are talking about, like I said before, a good, healthy mix of technologists and lawyers. So I definitely agree with what Devon just said about how helpful it is to have people who are used to contractual language and to have people who are used to how that language expresses itself in like a lot of different contexts. I definitely think that's a good attribute, as is critical thinking. I would also say, and this sounds obvious, or at least it will, but a really useful thing, I think, is to embed the team, your team in general, with a good knowledge of the technology itself, as well as its key limitations. Because there are certain things that machine learning can't do, particularly in a legal practice context. And we know that like AI has always had trouble extracting data from like structured tables, for example, in the context of some of the sort of financial instrument documents we tend to use. Or, for example, if we know that we're going to need a certain amount of examples of a particular clause or a particular piece of information we're trying to extract to get it to the level of accuracy that we need, having that information and having that understanding in advance before you get started so that you can plan effectively for that, and actually creativity, think of creative solutions to address that in the context of what you're doing. I do think those two things are really important. It sounds a bit odd to talk about sort of knowledge of limitations when it comes to AI and when it comes to technology uses, but I do think it is really, really important because it can help you decide what to do or decide how to meet particular challenges.
Nice. Shea.
I'm really lucky to be on a team of like highly technical lawyers and developers that I can fall back on at any point if I get in over my head or need like a second set of eyes. I do all of the custom training, but we do have my boss, Michael, and another analyst on our team, Amani, are more than happy to hop on and do kind of quality control. And when you're going through and creating these clauses, you're making tons of decisions on the way through that maybe you're not cognizant of until you get that second person coming in, like, why did you do this? Why didn't you tag it this way? And that's very helpful to just have another set of eyes. Since we're a small team, and because I think it's sometimes more important to know Kira well than the subject matter that is being kind of tagged, I will do the first review and then make sure the subject matter expert agrees with the tags I've had. Like ideally, they would annotate something for me and then I would go replicate those on the documents. That doesn't always happen. A lot of times it's, hey, Shea, look for documents with this title and I'd like to pull, something about this. And here's the business goal basically that we're trying to achieve. So my role is getting the project started, creating the worksheets, identifying the areas where the custom clauses are really needed, mapping those out of the box clauses to the desired extractions, and then training, testing, and deploying those custom clauses. And the type of person, I guess, somebody who's just willing to try and figure stuff out. I read dissertations to come up with kind of what good theories I could use to edit my models and like which things to deselect from training and things like that.
Yeah.
Amazing.
What's that?
I said that was amazing. You share those dissertations by all means. That would be
it's pretty. We could probably even Adam, who is on here lurking, could probably even give some guidance and has, in fact, one of the things at Kira that we started doing was getting our legal knowledge engineering team a lot closer to our research team so that they could each kind of communicate a little bit more about that. In fact, Adam, if you feel like hopping on, don't know if you do, you could talk a little bit more about that collaboration between sort of research and legal knowledge engineering.
Sure. I mean,
so this is Dr. Adam Robles.
So one of the things we were very cognizant of, especially shortly after I joined Kira, or what was then Kira, was that making some of the machine learning models work well required a little bit more nuanced understanding of what was going on behind the scenes. But the problem here is that I'm not a lawyer. I don't want to be a lawyer. And I unfortunately know far more about the law than I ever wanted to prior to working at Kira and some other work I did in my past. But to actually make this happen, you then have to have a relatively collaborative relationship between, the domain experts and the people that who are not necessarily training the fields or the training that machine learning models, but are the ones kind of helping design algorithms or engineer features or try and figure out new ways to do things or leverage, particular aspects of language. And so you can only really do that if these people work closely together. Maybe in an ideal world, there will at some point be people that can do both very well. But I don't see that happening anytime soon. Just for the practical realities of time investment. So yeah, I think it's generally went well. There have been periods where we've discovered after the fact that there's been occasionally some apocryphal knowledge that has been passed down, through LKE teams to other individuals over time, where it's like we've had to help walk them back to be like, no, it's just more like they observed this happen and consistently observed it happen. So then it became like a piece of folkloric knowledge that got propagated. And then you're like, no, we have to walk this back now. It just happened. This is a thing you happen to have observed, but was not actually the case. And then there are certain situations where we might look at that and say, okay, is there some unintentional correlation going on here? And for those of you that might be familiar with it, there was this horse back in the day called Clever Hans that was reading signals off of his handler about how to do arithmetic and stuff like that when it would stomp his hoof. And so you can kind of have similar situations in machine learning scenarios where there will be unintentional signals that will trigger on certain pieces of language or artifacts. And so again, having this kind of close collaboration means you can sometimes avoid these things, but due to the fact that it's the English language or not the English language, as the case may be, there are going to be tendencies of certain correlated words with particular concepts or things like that as well. So it's kind of this balancing act of trying to understand what's going on and why, without either side necessarily having the best understanding of the other side, which I think is only really facilitated if you have a close collaborative relationship.
So just to be clear, for all our viewers out there, Saf, Devon, Shea, all of you come from more the subject matter expert side of contracts, correct? You didn't do computer science in undergrad or anything like that?
I did take computer science, but I am not a data scientist by any means in grad school. And I love it, but I did.
You were in school for a long time, Shea. You probably took courses and everything, right?
But what I love about Kira is my theories don't have to be right to improve the model. So Adam's exactly right. What I'm thinking could be off the wall, but if my model gets better, it doesn't matter if my theory was right. The end result is an improved model. So I try to keep track of if I deselect these or I change this process, model will improve, and then check it off if it does.
Cool. Devon, technical background or more subject matter expert?
Yes, definitely not a technical background, though. I think anyone who goes into this kind of secretly wishes they did. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where I wish I could probably be more like Adam, but that's not my skill set. But I think this kind of model training kind of allows you to get a taste of that in some ways, but leverage your skill set, So I'm kind of the same position as Shea, though I didn't go to law school either.
How about you, Seth?
I would say I'm definitely more on the technical side rather than the subject matter expert side. Like Adam, everything I've learned about the law has been against my will. No, I'm kidding. But
you work in the law firm, man.
No, I'm kidding. It's interesting, actually, working so closely with subject matter experts. You do tend to pick up quite a lot of knowledge from them. Certainly.
I think Adam or Alex could probably do a pretty solid job of spotting an exclusivity or a change of control clause.
That's the thing. You would be surprised just how much you learn just by healthily examining these documents and training these models. It's actually a very good way, to train, junior lawyers in many ways, that's like some of the ways to be facilitated this during this process, because it's a good way for them to understand the context of those documents and what they're actually looking for. So certainly for our team, training on like a number of different legal areas is key. But no, my background is very much on the technology side. I'd say less on machine learning. Before I started at Macfarlanes, to some extent, I was more, I have more of an experience with like automation languages generally, or automation in general in terms of that context. My own language skill tends to be in like a mix of sort of front end and back end languages and that kind of thing. But very much on the tech side. Although, like I said, we have a really good balance of both in our team, which is really refreshing.
Neat. Okay, we are almost at the top of the hour. So, what is your one biggest tip that you would tell someone who was embarking on training a contracts AI, especially someone at a professional services firm, but really anyone who was doing that? Seth, let's start with you.
Well, I'll mention, again, really briefly what I said earlier about knowing your limitations, knowing what AI can and can't do. I think that is really important when it comes to starting any kind of project like this, because it can allow you to think really creatively about how you actually get to where you need to go. Linked to that, I would also say enhance your use of AI by augmenting it with other technologies. I think that is a really good way to use AI incredibly effectively. So think about process automation as part of that. Think about within using AI, using global keywords and phrases and searches and that kind of thing, building automation on top of that. I would also say, and maybe, okay, this is 3 at this point, have really good information architecture. It's a common statement, IA before AI, but it's incredibly important. The more structured your data is, the better you will get out of your AI tools and out of your AI training program. And you can use AI to help you get there. You can use AI to help build good information architecture. It's a really useful tool, particularly in a law context where a lot of our data that we use in this context is completely unstructured. It's incredibly valuable.
Thank you. Devon.
I'm going to kind of build on something that Shea touched on. You want to make sure that you're always learning from what you're doing in this program, right? And so if you're building this from the ground up, you're really going to want to take a look at what's working for you in training models and be sure to document that. I know for us in Mainspring, we started, taking the time to do documentation when you're trying to keep up with your workload is difficult, but I would make sure that you focus on documenting what's bringing you success so that you have something in place that when you're expanding your team, you have that documentation to go back to, and you can train people, you can train more people. So I think focusing on, how can you grow and scale, you have to think about what you're doing in the beginning to document that. So that would be my biggest tip.
Cool. Shea, close us out.
Sure, yeah, and just like Saf said, setting realistic expectations for what the tool can do and what it can't do, and the cost, time, and effort required. Because typically I'll say we can accomplish whatever you want, but it's going to cost something and there's going to be a lot of time and effort involved. So like, what are our boundaries to get this completed? And often, like Devon said too, if I don't take good notes, once you start saying like, oh, the keeping track of things, if I get to a point where I'm like, oh, I'll remember, I know I need to take a break. If you don't feel like documenting what you're doing anymore, you probably need to step away from it. And those are the 2 rules that I try to follow.
This has been super interesting for me. And I've been doing this kind of contracts AI stuff since 2011. So I think I learned a lot and found it really interesting, and just super interesting to hear about kind of problems that you face and things that you think about and how you refine data. And so I suspect that our viewers out there today and in the future will find this really, really, really valuable. So thank you so much, Saf, Devon, and Shea. Really awesome to have you on. Before we all go, by the way, a little public service announcement, such as it is, if someone is looking for some experienced model builders out there, DocuSign recently cut the entire SEAL model building team. And so there's supposed to be some really strong people on that team. So if there was any demand out there for those kinds of people, get in touch with me and I can hook you up with them. But I think there are a bunch of very experienced model builders who currently are on the market. Not saying that there aren't other excellent model builders around at different professional service firms and different corporates and different other technology vendors, but rather just that a set of them came available. And it is a limited, but I think pretty valuable skill set to have. So just thought I would put that out as a PSA. Okay, with that, thank you, viewers, for watching us. Hope you found this as interesting as I did. And big thanks to our panelists and Adam for popping on. For giving us a lot of useful information. Thank you so much.